Morning, honourable members, and I want to thank you for the possibility to have this debate on migration management. Of course, I agree with you that we need to manage migration in an effective and holistic way. That is what this Commission has been doing during this mandate. And this is exactly what we agreed all together with the Pact on Migration and Asylum, which we are now focused to implement fully. And at the same time, we have taken a whole route of approach, responding to various operational needs with targeted support to member states and by acting in close cooperation with key partner countries. And we started to see results. The Pact is our common response to better manage migration in an orderly and effective way. It will better secure our external borders, ensure fair and efficient procedures, protect those in need, and mean quicker returns for those who don't have the right to stay. When adopting the Pact, we gave ourselves 2 years to put in place the necessary new rules, procedures, and structures. We are now working closely with each member state to identify needs and priorities for actions at national level. We know we must stay ambitious, including in our time frame. Moving swiftly on the implementation of the Pact could help member states manage migration already better today. This is why the Commission is ready to accelerate the implementation of some elements of the Pact. In all cases, we will carefully maintain the important balance between solidarity and responsibility, as well as the internal and external dimensions of the Pact. The external dimension and the whole of the route approach will continue to be top priority. We will continue to develop deeper and more effective, comprehensive and strategic partnerships with countries of origin and transit. Comprehensive partnerships are working. On the central Mediterranean route, arrivals are down by 64%. On the Western Balkans routes, arrivals are down by 77%. These partnerships are covering mutually beneficial interests: macroeconomic stability, business environment, trade, investments, renewable energy, clean tech, digital connectivity. And in these partnerships, migration and security are embedded as a key component. We are working with our partners on operational support to counter migrant smuggling, border management to prevent irregular migration, as well as readmission. Reducing irregular migration should pave the way for more legal and safe pathways. Migrants are essential to our economies and societies. Let's not forget that most migrants are coming legally to the EU to work or to join their family. And Europe's population is shrinking, as we all very well know. 4 in 5 companies say it is difficult to find workers with the right skills, and 3/4 of SMEs say they face skills shortages for at least one job role. We need to attract talent to Europe, open legal and safe pathways, and integrate those coming in our society as part of us. Today, you put returns on the agenda. And I agree that the EU migration policy can only be sustainable and fair if those who do not have the right to stay in the EU are effectively returned. We have seen some progress. Effective returns increased by 18% in January to June of this year, compared to the first half of last year, with almost 59,000 effective returns. On the operational side, the high-level network for returns and the EU return coordinator are working to implement the return roadmap, taking targeted action to make returns more effective. For instance, supporting member states in the return of dangerous individuals, or using the return alerts from the Schengen information system. We see good practices across member states emerging. Some already implement elements of the Pact, such as a negative asylum decision being combined with an immediate return decision. Others look at incentives as part of return case management to encourage voluntary returns and to manage the risk of absconding. And Frontex is now covering almost 45% of all effective returns. Return specialists are part of the standing core. On the external side, the Article 25A of the visa code mechanism is a tool that has proven its effectiveness. Our efforts have yielded results. Yet, when we look at the overall numbers, with almost 500,000 persons ordered to leave the EU every year, only around 1 in 5 people who received a return decision are actually returned. So we need to do more. Member States' national procedures on returns still have many loopholes, and they diverge too much. We need to put in place a common European return system. For this, we need a renewed, modern legal framework adapted to today's challenges. 6 years ago, the Commission made a proposal to recast the 16-year-old return directive, but co-legislators could not agree on it. Last week, President von der Leyen announced to the European Council that we will be making a new legislative proposal early in the new mandate to make returns more effective and protect the fundamental rights and dignity of those that are under the return procedure. This time, the EU will need to get it right. We cannot afford another 6 years without any progress on this important issue. An effective return policy will be essential for our comprehensive approach on migration, which must remain firm but fair, giving protection to those in need, preventing irregular and unsafe arrivals, and returning those not in need. The Pact's implementation remains our focus. At the same time, it is key to complete the picture with the essential missing piece, an effective return policy. During the upcoming weeks and months, the Commission will work closely with the co-legislators to make sure that we deliver together on this missing piece. Thank you.
Vielen Dank, Frau Kommissarin.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. The first speaker on behalf of the EPP is Mr. Thomas Tobé.
Thank you, President, Commissioner. The EPP Group strongly welcomes the clear and coherent position that was taken by the Commission President and the European Council last week. We need to take back control of migration. We have common borders, and therefore we need a common European response. With the adoption of the Migration Pact, we took the first major step that we, and not the criminal smugglers, should decide who can enter Europe. However, it was always very clear to us that more would be needed to secure our borders and increase returns of those who do not have the right to be in Europe. The EPP want to be very clear with what we expect: a speedy and full implementation of the Migration Pact, a new proposal on returns presented within the first 100 days of the next Commission, increased cooperation with third countries who should also explore new solutions like return hubs outside of Europe. And we need a stronger Frontex, and the instrumentalization of migrants that we see from Russia and Belarus, we need a full stop. The EPP will continue to lead the way forward, together with responsible political groups of this House. I can see that parts of the left and parts of the far right are united in their resistance to a common European policy. But EPP stands ready, together with the Commission and the Member States, to deliver. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Irache García Pérez for S&D.
Gracias, Presidenta.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, after 10 years of disagreements, blockades, obstacles, we managed to reach an agreement on a solution on the migration phenomenon 10 years later. The Socialist family will not allow the letter of shame, which was prepared last week by Mrs. von der Leyen, is there to bury the Migration Pact, an agreement that we must start implementing in 2025. The only charter we are bound by is the Charter of Fundamental Rights of the European Union, a charter that guarantees the right to asylum and prohibits collective expulsions. Indiscriminate deportations, which are not just a question of migration policy, they represent the most unworthy abdication of the values of the European project. Now that the Italian judiciary has ruled that the Meloni government's infamous agreement with Albania is illegal, Mrs. von der Leyen must abandon her inhumane and illegal proposal to set up deportation centres in third countries. It is unacceptable to kneel down before the extreme right to bless a migration model that violates human rights, which until now she considered illegal. Ladies and gentlemen, we know that disinformation, prejudice and hatred of others is the only reason of the existence of the extreme right. What is not or less tolerable is the shameful attitude of the right wing that rejects a diagnosis of immigration based on real data. Most of the projections on population in the European Union indicate that by 2025 we will reach a peak population, and between now and the next few decades the number of retired people will increase by 35%, and European population will lose 30 million people of working age. In the face of this looming demographic drama, the People's Party says that immigrants come here to receive subsidies, although the reality is that migrants use public services and social benefits less than those born in the EU. They tell us that migrants come to take our jobs, but the reality is that sectors such as agriculture, construction, hotel and catering business, with a percentage of migrants of 20 to 50% would collapse without their labour. We're also being told that migrants put our loved ones at risk. So half the people who look at after our children, our parents and our grandparents, are foreigners. Ladies and gentlemen, the People's Party and the false Patriots, you know that irregular entries into the European Union have dropped by 42%. You use the pain of human beings fleeing from death and misery to generate fear and to achieve power. In the face of the cruelty of the measures that you hide behind, you call them innovative measures, but the only possible solution is a humane, orderly and safe migration policy. A migration policy that extends a circular migration agreements with third countries to facilitate recruitment at source, a migration policy that promotes economic development and political stability in the countries of origin, with development aid, plans to combat food security, and programs to promote opportunities for young people and women, and especially to fight against the mafias that traffic in human beings. Ladies and gentlemen, migration has always been one of the great driving forces behind the development of nations. It is hatred and xenophobia that destroys nations. Welcoming those who come from abroad in search of a better life is not only a duty that Europe's history obliges us to fulfill, it is not only to defend the rights and freedoms of the largest democratic area in the world, it is also a path without return in order to guarantee the best welfare state in which we live. Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker is Kinga Gál for the Patriots for Europe group.
Tisztelt kollégák!
Colleagues, there have been several bad decisions, but one of the biggest mistakes made by the Commission is forcing through this asylum and migration pact. They have not focused on protecting external borders, and they have not focused on coordinating with countries of origin and transit. We need proper return policy. This issue is destroying Europe and free movement in Europe, and more member state leaders are actually rebelling against these decisions. Germany is reintroducing controls on borders, as are other countries as well. Since 2015, the Hungarian government has emphasised the need to strengthen external borders to stop illegal migration. But we have only been punished for doing this. It's scandalous and unfair that the Commission is punishing Hungary €200 million for protecting Europe's external borders, whilst in silence they agree that defending the external border is not a crime. What kind of hypocrisy is this? And then look at what's happening to Mr. Salvini as well. This is unacceptable. Forcing through illegal migration is destroying Europe, and it is breaking European cooperation. This is why we need to allow member states to opt out from this mistaken European policy. We need to stop the punishment on Hungary and stop the migration pact. Thank you.
Als nächste Rednerin.
The next speaker is Nicola Procaccini.
Für die ECR.
For the ECR.
Grazie, Presidente.
Thank you, President. Now, two strong messages were launched by 5 member states 5 months ago. Let's stop illegal migration was one of these. We really believe in democracy. We don't feel that we have to write this into the title of our group or party. We believe that we should not betray the will of the people. Up to now, we have followed the no borders line of the left, and we had thousands of migrants who died at sea, 1 million returns which did not take place, and our cities have now been prey to degradation and insecurity. I think the time has come to change our tack. We have to govern migration. Just anybody can't come in, but people who are really persecuted, people we can really take in with hospitality and with a prospect of integration. So we have to deal with the migratory phenomenon before it arrives on European territory. Colleague Perez, externalization, outsourcing is already in the new pact. That is why we set up a special economic fund for this purpose. This is why the new pact can be considered as a small first step in the right direction to deal with migration beyond the borders of Europe, will ensure that migrants don't pay thousands of dollars to hand their lives over to the smugglers. It avoids them arriving in Europe and becoming labor force for the various mafias. And it will avoid that a socialist chancellor deciding to set up borders within the European Union, and unknown to the German taxpayers, there's finance which is provided to NGOs. So what we really want to do is further economic and social development. We ask for the help of a country such as Albania, a democratic country, is simply common sense. And that is what Italy is doing now. And it's obtaining unimaginable results up to recently. And some socialist governments have understood this, the British government, the Danish government. Nobody can really know when and how a new European migration policy will work. What we do know is that the policy used up to now has not worked. In other words, your policy.
Thank you. The next speaker is Valérie Ayer from the Renew Group.
Thank you, Madam. Honourable colleagues, 48 hours. That is the time that 12 migrants spent in Albania. How can we possibly be inspired by this failure? The British government had taken dissuasive measures, signing an agreement with Rwanda. 18% more immigrants is the result. And then a naval blockade was suggested. The result is that there were more arrivals than ever before. And now the returns to Albania only took a couple of hours. So, colleagues, apart from the crisis as to the cost of life, we also have the cost of populism. 12 migrants in Albania, 150 million euros, 5 million euros per migrant. That is a huge amount of money. This does not respect our values, and it simply doesn't work. So basically, colleagues, the political responsibilities should be shouldered, especially by those who clearly see that the results are failing them. So the sovereignty and independence is undermined if you put your fate in the hands of others. Efficiency is to control immigrants when they arrive. Efficiency is to register them in a common database, to accelerate in the treatment of requests, to take those who are legitimate to receive asylum and to remove the ones that are not entitled to this asylum. So the Immigration Pact, which we signed and voted on here in this very hemicycle last spring. So please put this entire pact into practice, and let us make sure that the directive on returns is revised, and let us not use the migrants, and let us not let Russia use migrants as an excuse. So let us not find false solutions and demagogical solutions. Let us strengthen our European response to this European challenge.
Thank you. The next speaker on behalf of the Greens is Seneca Strigg.
Return policies are talk of the town for years now. Member States complain about the lack of cooperation by countries of origin, but they are silent about the very small number of readmission requests that they make. They insist on harsher rules to deport people, but they don't mention their bureaucratic failures to return people under the current rules. Commissioner, it's your task to make sure that Member States do their homework, and to propose laws when they are necessary in a manner that is evidence-based and focused at solving the issue effectively. But in von der Leyen's announcement of a new legislative proposal on returns, she allows Member States to shift out their responsibility. In these so-called return hubs, people will most probably be put in limbo, in indefinite detention, having no rights or perspective. That's not sustainable return. But that's a great way for Member States to circumvent their EU obligations. The Commission should not facilitate this, but ensure that Member States use all the current possibilities and invest finally in an effective and equal cooperation with countries of origin.
I therefore urge you, Commissioner, not to be distracted by populistic rhetoric, but to focus on actual solutions. Spewer tougher and tougher language on returns is the easy thing to do. Actually fixing the shortcomings and act in line with human rights is the right thing to do.
Thank you very much. The next speaker for the left is Estrella Galan.
Gracias, Presidente.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Commissioner, the most repeated word in your speech was returns, 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 returns. Is that the myopic approach we want to apply to migration? Building prisons for refugees in Europe is barbaric. Concentration camps for human beings whose only crime has been to flee for their lives. Can you imagine if we had done this with Ukrainians who were fleeing the Russian invasion? Ms von der Leyen has crossed a red line in exchange for a handful of votes. How long are we going to allow Mrs. Meloni to govern Europe? The proposal to open Guantanamos in neighbouring countries which do not respect human rights is illegal, immoral and inhumane. The agreement between Italy and Albania violates access to the right to asylum and international law and breaches the principle of non-refoulement. These innovative solutions we've heard about to externalize asylum and borders are in reality a violation of human rights and a failure that's been proven for decades. Do you really want to innovate? Then you should apply international law, act humanely, open up safe legal pathways so that people do not have to risk their lives at sea. This is the only way to manage migration effectively, which is consistent with the with European principles and values, and that Meloni disregards and that we apparently want to buy. Thank you. The next speaker is Sarah Knafo for the ESN Group.
Madame la Présidente.
Madam Chair, colleagues, well, we walk and drive through Brussels and we ask ourselves, are we still in Belgium? And in Strasbourg, you listen on the tram, very loud telephone conversations. You know, you need to look behind you. These feelings, you must have felt these, but if you may not recognize this, your children will certainly suffer from this. We feel that we're depossessed. We're no longer at home. We're not the ones who left our countries, but it's almost as if our country has left us. And that is not the end of the story, but it is not too late. We know that there are solutions. Immigration has changed our countries, and it is not an incurable disease. We need to look at what tens of countries are doing. We've done this in the past. 500,000 migrants reaching our countries cannot be stopped. Of course it can be stopped. It is our civil servants that stamp their documents and hand them over to the immigrants. Let us just tell them to stop doing that. And if these foreigners don't want to leave, well, they have no choice. We are the ones who decide who wants to come, who we want to stay, and who needs to go. People tell us that we're not familiar with the true situation, but, you know, their recipe is to change nothing. But in a few years' time, we will no longer believe that we have fallen into this trap. But if we don't react, we will see that such important and powerful people died without resistance. So there is still time. Let us fight for this.
The next speaker is Jeroen Lenaers.
President, I am confused. I listened to the Commissioner from our socialist colleagues having a very constructive and balanced approach to migration, doing more to counter illegal migration, working harder to improve returns, an agenda that was embraced also by the European Council last week, including all the socialist leaders there. And then I listened to the leader of the socialists in this House, and I only hear no, no, no. It's all extreme right. Is Ms. Dalli extreme right all of a sudden? Is Prime Minister Sanchez extreme right? Let's embrace the fact that leaders, actually from left-wing to right-wing governments, from east to west and north to south, came together on an idea that more commitments are necessary. Indeed, returns are down, arrivals have been down in the past years because of the very agreements with third countries that you so fiercely opposed in this House. So yes, this is not about burying the Pact. It is about implementing the Pact, but also realizing that more is necessary. As President von der Leyen wrote, we cannot be complacent. The Pact is a huge achievement, but we need to do more, especially on returns. 1 in 5 people who are told to return actually go back to their country of origin. In 2023, this was 350,000 people. Also for the colleagues on the left, if we want to keep public support, if we want to keep resources for taking care of real refugees, we need to improve this, and we need to do it together in a spirit of compromise. So let's put new ideas on the table, like the Council said. Let's dare to think outside the box, and let's do it quickly. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Ana Catarina Mendes.
Thank you very much, President, Commissioner, colleagues. I think we need to be very clear when it comes to the Commission and Council's proposal on migration. This measure goes against the values of the European project. It's a mistake. It's inhumane. Externalizing our borders is an affront to human rights. The Italian courts and the European Court of Justice are approving what I have just said. I've heard we need to have innovative solutions, but the Albania solution from Italy is worrying, but it also reminds us we must not remain silent. The courts in Italy ordered that the migrants transferred be returned to Italy because the countries of origin, Egypt and Bangladesh, were not considered safe. Let's remember the Geneva Convention, the European Charter of Fundamental Rights. And there's also a case in the Czech Republic. This is a case in the Court of Justice. A safe country cannot be declared unless the whole territory is free of danger. Colleagues, here we should not, we're talking about human rights here. Externalizing borders is a real error because it's destroying people's lives. We need to comply with the European project.
You accept the blue card from Mr. Oliveira? Mr. Oliveira, 30 seconds.
Thank you very much, President. Ms. Mendes, you have approved the Asylum Pact, which focuses on these measures, and the S&D wants to adopt the 2025 budget, which refers to physical infrastructure to contain migration. How can you have a speech defending European values and at the same time do that and do things like that? Mr. Oliveira, I am very happy to respond to you. You're right. The S&D in the European Parliament approved the Pact on Migration. The socialist Portuguese government helped to ensure that there was the best compromise possible in this pact. What we need to do is change perceptions and hate speech and fears, because the pact hasn't actually been implemented yet. But I will always be against externalizing borders. I think it's an error. And we have made commitments in this, and in this pact, externalization of borders has always been an error.
Dank u wel, voorzitter.
Thank you, Madam Commissioner. Well, the immigration policy of the European Union has really only looked at the interests of the immigrants. Well, the Welt said a few weeks ago that the Migration Pact is not going to lead to a significant a drop in the number of immigrants in Europe, and an EU diplomat said, well, we all know this is pretty clear. It is only by reducing the number of people arriving and to carry out our return policies, especially in the case of illegal asylum seekers, well, we can really protect the situation of European citizens, especially in the area of health and in the area of housing. A holistic approach is what we need to see in Europe, because we want to get a very strict immigration and asylum policy. And this would include modernization of the refugee treaties, the possibilities of an opt-out situation in the case of asylum and immigration, and a very strict return directive, and to reduce the pull factors for immigrants. The Netherlands, together with other European countries, will be working very hard to drastically reduce immigration into Europe, because we need to change course. It is either now or never. Thank you.
Pani Przewodnicząca, Pani Komisarz, Szanowni
Thank you, President, Madam Commissioner, dear colleagues. The migratory policy of the European Union is under the dictatorship of the Germans. We have to follow the interests of Germany, which are supposed to be synonymous with the interests of Europe. But this isn't really going to solve the problem. This is just legalization of the criminal acts of the smugglers. When it transpired that the open door policy, German policy, actually did not serve, Germany blamed other countries such as Poland. Poland is a country where we could have thousands of illegal migrants who could come from Germany. Could I turn to Mr. Weber? You're coming to the end of the Oktoberfest. Do drink your beer, but think also of your migration policy. You're sending terrorists, dangerous terrorists, back to Afghanistan, or people who've knifed others. You're dealing with them. What about these people? What do we really need to do? We need to bolster the external borders of the EU. We need to finance the building of walls, finance Frontex, and a proper returns policy. We have to put an end to this illusory policy. We really need a proper returns policy, which is a responsible one. We need to take over our borders again. Thank you.
That's money.
Wel, dank u wel,
Thank you so much, Madam. Well, let me just tell you that Council apparently was not interested in this important debate. And I'm very pleased to see Commissioner Dalli. Of course, it is a bit of a shame that the Council representatives are not here, or other representatives of the Commission, because for us this is an important debate. It is a key debate for this European Parliament. Honourable Chair, we've taken steps in Parliament when we talk about the Immigration Pact. And I think the only thing we need to do is implementation of the Migration Pact. We don't need to take 2 years. Let's do it today rather than tomorrow. Steps need to be taken in terms of return policies. Asylum seekers, if they've been rejected in European countries, I don't want them to start the whole process again in other countries. So we need cooperation to avoid migrants from travelling through Europe. I think it makes sense. The return policy, if this policy has been adopted in one country, needs to be applicable to the whole EU. I mean, we need European measures to make sure that the asylum seekers are reduced, especially those coming to the Netherlands. And we hope that this can bear fruit because of the migration deal with Tunisia. We've had a 60% drop in the number of arrivals. So we need to deal with this at a European level. We need to fight against third countries, especially those who are not prepared to take back their nationals. if member states keep working on the basis of their own interest, well, we're not going to get anywhere. So we need to find a common solution. Thank you.
I would remind you, as we have already a lot of catch the eye requests, to keep the speaking time like it is provided. Diana Riba-Ichiner.
Gracias, Presidenta.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Commissioner, time and time again we fall into the same trap. This Parliament has forgotten about the blackmail that the EU suffers from third countries, such as Turkey. And we have decided to make these countries the protectors of our external borders. And one example is in Morocco. We've seen thousands of people being turned into political weapons, and they've been pushed against the border in Ceuta and Melilla to put pressure on the Spanish government in that case. And we continue to send thousands and thousands of funding, EU funding, and in Spain, for example, the issue of recognizing sovereignty over Western Sahara. And Ms. von der Leyen is supporting Ms. Maloney's ideas as an innovative and creative way of thinking, but it's the same recipe as always. If they're able to agree with Mohammed VI in Morocco or Erdogan, then we need to come together to have fair, effective migration policies.
Commanded to keep the speaking time. The next speaker is Ilaria Salis. 1 minute.
Grazie.
Thank you. Dear colleagues, with the shameful operation in Albania, which is reminiscent of colonial times, the Italian government is in the avant-garde of a European attack against migration and the right to asylum. The attempt, which has failed so far, to externalize detention in a concentration camp on foreign territory and to speed up assessment procedures and deportation of migrants is, first of all, cruel suffering and humiliation for people who are deported and treated as if they are humans that can be sacrificed. A proof of the fact that the whole operation is being managed with great incompetence, and is also forcing the legality of international law with regard to people who are moved around. And in a normal country, a government who would have disgraced itself internationally would resign. But we really have to stop this, and we have to create safe channels for migration.
Do you accept the...
We have 2 blue cards.
Mrs. Salis, we have 2 blue cards from Susanna Ceccardi and Anna Maria Cicini from... No. Okay. We come to the next speaker, Mary Khan. Please respect the decisions.
Ja, vielen Dank, Frau Präsidentin.
Thank you, Madam Commissioner. Well, you talked about figures, but in September, 166,000 people arrived in the European Union, and I think the figures are probably higher than that. We've been fighting this issue since 2015, and it's only now that we're discussing this. Millions of illegal immigrants have come to our continent, and they can't be removed. And now we're talking about a reform the common European asylum system, which needs to be implemented in a couple of years. But don't you think that anything has happened over the last few years? I mean, the Solingen and Mannheim situations, we don't want to reform. We don't further migration agreements. That is not what we want. We need to build centres, humane centres for people to be able to return. And we need a government in Germany which can make the European, which can leave the common European asylum system.
Masívna nelegálna migrácia predstavuje pre Európu.
Thank you. Massive and illegal migration poses an existential threat to Europe. However, for For decades, Western countries have downplayed these dangers, and now they are reaping the bloody consequences of their naivety. All those who warned them of these dangers were branded xenophobes or racists or extremists, and now they are shocked that these extremists are gaining majorities in many member states. When will this Parliament understand that legal migration is wrong? Our task is not to deal with the consequences of this, but to stop illegal migration once and for all. Redistributing immigrants, tearing down Schengen and the Migration Pact, none of this works because they don't solve migration crises. The only solution is to strictly control external borders and to have a strict returns policy afterwards. Only those who have reason to be in the EU with proper papers should be allowed into the EU. The solution is that simple. We should stop pretending that this was be an innovative solution. This is laughable. This solution, of course, costs a lot of money, but it's about the safety of our citizens, and they deserve this. We are giving tens of billions to third countries for their protection. We need to also spend this on protecting our borders and protecting our way of life in our Europe. Thank you.
Next speaker, Mrs. Dupont.
President, colleagues, let us for a second remind ourselves what the starting point last term was. Member States were not able to finalise the previous pact. The House had been kept in numerous discussions about the fact, was also not able to conclude. It took us long negotiations for a complex package, and finally last year we arrived with a solution. Is it a silver bullet? How can it? It was always clear that it's a baseline system for the inner dimension of the European Union. We always made clear that we cannot leave it there, that we need to improve and then we need to step up. And thanks to the EPP, the external dimension was already part of that. Therefore, and we heard the numbers, only 20% of those who have no right to stay in the European Union are actually returned, which means we need to step up returns by various means. We need effective and meaningful third country cooperation with a European approach. We need to use the full leverage of the visa code, which has been at the hands of the member states for quite some while. We need to fight trafficking and smuggling networks by all means. And we need to allow Frontex to take a greater role in assisting member states in return and in third country cooperation. And, of course, we need to address instrumentalization as a hybrid threat because it's a highly sophisticated, a highly cynical, but also a highly beneficial for the organisers that, well, it's nothing else than state-sponsored criminal networks here. The EPP will always be the constructive force, and we will always be the ones who drive the asylum and migration policy forward. Thanks.
Vielen Dank, Frau Dupont. Wir haben eine blaue Karte von Herrn Andras Laszlo.
Thank you, Mrs. Dupont. We have a blue card, Mr. Laszlo. Mr. Laszlo, 30 seconds.
Thank you very much. Madame Dupont, you are from the EPP. We are witnessing a severe crisis now in Europe, still. I have a very simple question to you. Does the EPP support still the relocation of illegal migrants in Europe? Thank you.
Sorry, could you just repeat, please, because it wasn't clear?
Does the EPP still support the relocation of illegal immigrants in the EU between member states? Thank you.
Well, if you had been part of the negotiating team of the Pact, you would have well known that we found a solution for the question of relocation, for the question of solidarity, and for the question of solidarity that member states need to contribute, which is the answer to your question.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Cecilia Strada. For 1 minute, please.
Grazie, Presidente. Thank you, President, Commissioner, colleagues. We've been talking a lot about Albania and the centres set up there, innovated by Meloni, as something which Europe could look to by way of a model for future operations. Now, last week, the migrants arrived. 2 were vulnerable, 2 were minors. They shouldn't have been ever taken to Albania, and they had to go back to Italy. The others didn't come from safe countries, according to the judges. So the accelerated procedure should not have been applied, and they shouldn't have been brought to Albania either. Incidentally, all of that cost a lot more than what it would have cost if the usual procedures had been carried out directly in Italy. Now, the centre in Albania is a logistic nightmare, and it is not in keeping with international law and EU law. It is a threat to human rights, and it's also economically harmful. It could be a model, yes, of course, as of how not to do things. Europeans want to stay on the side of the law and on the side of human rights. Thank you.
Garot.
Thank you very much. We need a radical change in migration policy. European Commission and countries like France want rapid implementation of the Migration Pact, but this approach is false. All it will do is accelerate mass migration. When it comes to return to countries of origin, Ms. von der Leyen is saying that she's in favour of a firmer policy, but she's doing all she can to encourage entry to the European Union. Our policy needs to ensure rigorous management of external borders and also control internal borders, like Germany has been doing recently, and use solutions like Denmark and Italy to externalise asylum claims. We need returns agreements. Europe needs to ensure security of its citizens and the sovereignty of its nations. It's a matter of justice, security, and respect for the will of the people. Thank you.
Speaker is Asita Kanko.
Thank you, Madam President. Thank you, Commissioner. Dear colleagues, they do nothing for our safety. This was the heart cry from German families about the many knife attacks in their country. They feel powerless and abandoned by us. Citizens are deeply concerned about the EU's failing migration policy. Integration is non-committal and border control barely exists. Taboos about protecting external borders and the illusion that return policy is the solution prevail, while only 20% actually return. Therefore, Germany, France and others are reintroducing internal border controls. Out of justified fear of attacks and to stop illegal migration. Understandable. But this destroys our prosperity because with internal borders popping up here and there, Europe loses the substance that guarantees the single market. Who will bear the brunt of this? The consumer, the traveller and our businesses. If the EU still wants to be relevant, it's time to act more decisively. Throwing more money at Frontex will not help. Reviewing the agency's mandate and turning it into a real border protection agency will, and equipping, not hindering, the member states to protect the EU external borders. I count on the new Commission to get serious about this. Thank you.
The next speaker is Fabienne Keller.
Madame la Présidente, Madame la
President, Commissioner. Migration is a European challenge which requires a European response. This is what was said in the conclusions of the heads of state or government of the 17th of October last. That is our compass. That's the way to manage migration. And this led to the adoption of a historic agreement, which was the European Pact for Migration. Now, this pact provides us with tools which are quite powerful to help us deal with irregular migrants. And now that we have the border asylum procedure, we've achieved improvements there too. We can help people who are persecuted very quickly thanks to this new system. In this way also, we can share responsibility in a fair way, and we can also show solidarity among member states. This is a true revolution, dear colleagues, and our priority is to ensure that it is implemented appropriately. Now, I am firmly against so-called innovative solutions such as externalization of the returns policy in hubs which are far from our countries. We need to work on a new directive, of course, on returns, but these centres cost a fortune to the taxpayer, they're ineffective and they just create more problems with third countries rather than solve problems. Governments have tried to set up these systems, and they've all been a dead end, and the UK's abandonment of their plan is an example of that. Let's stick to our own migration policy and be masters of it.
Mrs. Keller, we have a blue card for you from Mr. Nigeri.
Speaker is Erik Marquardt.
Frau Kommissarin.
Commissioner, Madam President, some of the Conservative colleagues have just said that they want to have more border controls, and it's true that in recent years we've lost control because the rules and laws that we have passed are not being complied with. Look at what's happening in Italy. You can't simply just block minorities, even if the majorities want it. They're attacking the courts rather than complying with the rules. Now, I listen to you, Ms. Dali. When we come to agreements with Tunisia and Libya, there are political goals, but we also need to ensure that women are not systematically raped there, that people are not just locked away or sent into the desert. This is about cooperation in migration policy, and it's incredibly important. And a couple more things. First of all, from the Commission, I want to recognize these horrors when it comes to externalizing the borders and cooperation, and also do not move to the right. We will manage to do this together. Thank you.
Konstantinos Arvanitis.
Good morning, dear colleagues. Okay, we should stop people from coming. Maybe the way to do that would be to deal with the source, because for 5 years we've been saying that this new pact you've brought to us will be the burial stone over European solidarity. It will bury the right to asylum. And we insisted that we should find legal ways for people to immigrate to the European Union, to see if there is an obligation for relocation between member states. Why should it be voluntary? And we see what's happening in Germany and then maybe tomorrow in France. So reception countries are now being turned into the prison camps of United Europe. And we have this newfound idea of Albania, which is prison camps within Europe, but outside the European Union. So we're just turning a blind eye to reality and pushing it as far as away, this problem, which you consider a problem, away from your countries. And are you creating a solution, or are you turning it into a huge humanitarian crisis?
Ďakujem veľmi pekne, pani predsedajúca, pani komisárka. Vidím tu kolegov z Fidesu. Pamätajú si určite, keď sme v roku 2015...
Thank you so much. I think you may remember in 2015-2016 there was an extraordinary meeting of the Parliament in Brussels, because we were forced at the time to take a decision on the forced distribution of immigrants. And this didn't work, and it still was included in the Pact. There is no protection of foreign borders. We have no Schengen, and we don't have a proper return policy. Nothing is working, nothing. Commissioner, I don't understand that you said that there is only a very a tiny bit that is missing to input this policy into practice. We have, we're not against legal immigration. We're talking about illegal immigration, and we're talking about the member states and how member states can deal with this. We talk about the way in which the EU can deal with this.
Gracias, Presidente. Thank you very much, Madam President. The southern border of Europe, Canaries, Ceuta and Melilla, are at risk of collapsing because of constant arrival of immigrants and irregular migrants. The smugglers do not just choose casually where to send their boats. This is happening, and none of this is a coincidence. The Spanish government is not defending our borders or our security forces, and it disregards help from Frontex. The most inhumane migration policy socialist is the one that does not exist, that allows mafias to get involved and causes the deaths of millions of people at sea. The irresponsibility of Sanchez's government is putting the risk of European security at risk, but also is risking the lives of millions of people used by these smugglers. And it's because of the corruption cases that are affecting his party and government, and Sanchez is refusing to resign. It's unacceptable that Prime Minister Sanchez, who didn't wait a minute to give amnesty to a fugitive of justice, who every day is attacking institutions such as yesterday at Spanish public broadcaster, and has canaries and Ceuta and Melilla without help, with unaccompanied minors and no resources for the borders in this serious crisis. The real problem in Europe is Pedro Sanchez. Europe needs to act now, and it must force Sanchez to implement the Asylum Pact. Thank you.
Matthias Nemetz.
Thank you. Next speaker, Matthias Nemetz.
Ladies and gentlemen, the policies of Pedro Sanchez or Spain are not the problem, but the problem is the migration policy of Europe that is not efficient. Today, migration is driven by complex causes and crisis hotspots around the world. Our main problem is not returns. On the contrary, our biggest problem is that Europe continues to fund authoritarians in North Africa who are grossly oppressing their own citizens. Europe is still supporting the coast guards that act as people smugglers at the same time. Europe continues to send weapons to crisis hotspots, including Israel. How can Europe pretend so short-sightedly that our policies and actions have no consequences? Of course they do. Ladies and gentlemen, after 8 years, we endorsed the Pact on Migration and Asylum. It happened this year, just before the elections. Although the pact is not ideal, it offers answers to the challenges of migration. We must now concentrate on the implementation of the adopted package, as well as integration, effective treatment, and reception, not on measures that some might find appealing, but that will not really have an effect, such as the relocation of people to Albania. That will only strengthen the flow of migrants through Western Balkans. Thank you so much.
Borchia.
This debate is taking place a few days after a dreadful event which occurred in Verona, my city, which is a beautiful city, a very hospitable one, in the Veneto region, which is a land of immigration and integration. A boy, a young lad, died. This lad had attacked a police officer who had to shoot him. Now, this shows us that when we have too many foreigners arrive, and most of them are not entitled to international protection, it's then impossible, really, to deal with their reception. Now, I would have liked this debate to be more practical, more concrete, rather than ideological. In Europe, there are unlimited opportunities for reception. The whole question is a proper orderly policy, and the exact opposite to what we've had up to now. Now, I am very shocked by the Council of Europe's report, which is criticizing the Italian forces, police forces. They should be applauded and not criticized.
Yeah, there is a blue card from Maria Grappini. Do you accept it?
Yes, for sure.
Madame Grappini.
Stimate coleg, migrația este o problemă într-adevăr, dar ați spus...
Esteemed colleague, migration is a problem, but you also said that you don't agree with what we debated, and you would want to talk in more practical terms to ensure that there is no illegal migration, but also to help those leaving their country for economic reasons. But tell me, what are the solutions you have in mind? What are the concrete solutions you would propose for the Migration Pact?
Okay.
Well, thank you, colleague, for that question. This gives me the opportunity to explain our viewpoint. Now, clearly, the geopolitical disorders which are occurring at international level show us that we have to make certain choices. We need to manage an increasing number of asylum seekers. The figures tell us that most of the applications are rejected because unfounded. We can't give people the illusion, let them believe that it is possible to take everybody in. So we'll have to make certain choices. Thank you.
Next speaker is Charlie Weymouth for 1 minute.
Thank you, Chair. Colleagues, the right won the election. Securing the border, once rejected as heresy, has become mainstream. The Council, even the Commission, recognized the need to prevent illegal entry, host refugees outside the EU, and swiftly deport illegal migrants. But will the European Parliament defend Europe or open the floodgates? On Monday, this House rejected the left's attempt to control the debate on migration. Now, they will use their superpower, their unrivaled ability to whine and cry. For the past decade, this House has indulged the left. Colleagues, we cannot afford to lose another decade to leftist tears. There is a right-wing majority in this House to stop illegal migration, stop asylum abuse, and stop the weaponization of migrants. It's time we use it.
Next speaker is Abir Al-Sahlani. Also 1 minute, please.
Fru talman, fru kommission.
Thank you very much, Madam President, Commissioner. Well, apparently there are misunderstandings in this debate about how returns should be carried out. This is what we can't agree on, how that should happen without being able to reintegrate people. That's not the answer. It's also about prerequisites in countries of residence. There's also individual situations, people who are behind the statistics. We cannot have a situation where returns are always the solution. No, the Migration Pact is the solution. Secure rules, that needs to be the heart of European migration policy, whilst respecting human rights at all time and ensuring people's security. Our only response cannot simply be just to return. Yes, it needs to be part of a framework. Returns need to be part of our whole policy, but we need a broader approach. Thank you.
Accepted?
Of course.
Yes,
I'd
please,
love
for
to play
30
a bit.
seconds, Mr. Coles.
Yes, thank you. I have a very simple question. We talk about returns. Do you see the definition returns actually is the one by the legal basis expulsion? It's not about we're returning somebody who's, wandering around in Europe, but we are returning those who are not eligible to get international protection. And this is the question. So do you see the equal sign between returns and expulsion? Expulsion is a legal decision by law enforcement institutions that is not a political decision and should be enforced. Thank you.
It's okay.
I maybe do not see the conflict in your question or the big issue in your question. I do believe that what we are differing in is how do we do it? Nobody here is defending, the ever stay of everyone here. No one is defending that. We are talking about how do we make people return? How do we enable them actually to have a life in dignity when they go back home? How do we make their countries of origin receive them? And how do we make sure that these people are not in a limbo where nobody wants them and their lives are put on hold?
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Ignacio Roberto Marino. 1 minute.
Efficace e olistica.
So The title of our meeting today refers to effective and holistic, but there was a certain amount of lack of intellectual objectivity when this hall voted against the provision regarding a deportation of people to a lager, people who are escaping violence, hunger and poverty. The agreement of the Meloni government with Albania has a precedent, Guantanamo, where detainees can be treated above and beyond the law. But they were terrorist suspects. But here we're talking about a holistic treatment of people who are in a desperate state. Imagine last night, could I mention Mr. Procaccini? I suppose that you had a lovely meal last night, and you probably had a nice hot shower this morning. Well, here we have the holistic approach. According to the Prime Minister, or ministers in the Italian government, rather. We don't want any old people to come in, any old cat or dog, as it were, to come in to Europe. No, we want a better and more holistic approach than that.
Thank you, Madam President. Dear colleagues, Russia and Belarus are exploiting migrants in an attempt to destabilize the European Union. They are sending people illegally across the border into the European Union, challenging, threatening our security. This is a danger for the security of the European Union. We need to recognize this and we need to act on this. Whatever is illegal has to be tackled. The European Union needs to stand up for the rule of law. We need to defend the rule of law. Illegal migration is to be tackled. This is why a proposal on returns is to be welcomed. We are now seeing an instrumentalization of migration against the security of the European Union, with a clear attempt to divide us by the autocracies around the European Union. Russia is trying to instrumentalize migration against us through Belarus towards Poland. They will not hesitate to work with countries that are close to them in the Middle East and in Africa to continue to instrumentalize migration. We need to recognize this. We need to protect our borders properly. We need to protect ourselves from autocrats who are trying to destabilize our democracies. And we need to protect our external borders well so that the freedom of movement inside the European Union can continue. Thank you very much.
The next speaker is Jorge Buxade Villalba.
Gracias, Presidente.
Thank you, Madam. Well, against illegal immigration, deportation, against massive immigration, massive deportation. Well, when we talk about exercising or working, well, the illegal immigrants that come to Europe, it's not an option to return them, it's to meet the requests stated in the law. So we don't want to get any of this cosmetics of Mrs. von der Leyen. 6 days ago, 65 Pakistanis entered Europe illegally through the Canary Islands in one of the ships of the mafias, the shortest trip from Pakistan to Spain, Iran, Iraq, Jordan, Israel, Egypt, Algeria, Tunisia, Morocco, and Mauritania. Well, 9 Muslim countries allowed them to go through their land. Why don't they stay there? These Pakistanis are members of an Islamic State and they come and commit crimes and terrorist crimes in Europe. So what about those 65 Pakistanis? What prevents us from putting them on a plane and sending them to Islamabad? So let's stop talking. We need to fight mafias and to return immigrants to their countries. Thank you.
The next speaker, Mr. Piperea. I don't see him in the room, so we come to the next speaker, Elena Yoncheva.
Dear Madam President, if you want the European migration policy to be fair to those who need protection, it should be firm and effective to others who don't have the right to stay. Almost half of the people who arrive in Europe do not receive asylum status. And last year, less than 20% of those with return decisions were actually returned. And yes, Commissioner Dalli, we need to do more. Returns is the missing puzzle in the European Union migration policy. We need a new and effective return policy, but we also need the right approach. Lessons must be learned from the Italian-Albanian deal. Such deals are expensive and ineffective and open the door to legal challenges. What is most worrying, some member states see this as a way to avoid the implementation of the Migration Pact. Instead, we should focus on working with countries of origin, establishing sustainable partnership and implementation of the Migration Pact without delay. Thank you.
The next speaker is Elisabeth Wosenberg-Vrionidi.
Thank you, Mrs. President. Στο Ευρωπαϊκό Συμβούλιο
At the European Council on the 17th of the month, they discussed immigration under the light of new initiatives such as the German controls at the borders, also the Italian-Albanian agreement. We will repeat that we need to be successful in implementing this new legislation, which is based on solidarity. We should guard our external borders, but we should also do battle against these smugglers' networks. And it's returns that will make us successful, which is why the leaders of the European Union asked the Commission for a legislative proposal for speedy returns and also the recognition of safe third countries. Colleagues, we need to stand united and we need to immediately implement the legislation we recently voted on. When we talk about a fair legislation on immigration in the European Union, we should stand by our words.
Voorzitter, collega's, tijdens dit debat komen...
Honourable colleagues, well, during this debate, another 130 immigrants are entering Europe every hour, every day, every month. More than 3,000 asylum seekers per day. And they actually misuse the right to asylum, and 4 out of 5 of these people actually don't go back to their home countries. So during this debate, we have 50 new illegal immigrants entering this country, or this union. We talk about it, the Commission looks, but doesn't take any action. But the solution is pretty clear. The illegal immigrants need to be sent back, need to be returned to the countries who don't want to take on their illegal citizens. Well, they shouldn't receive a cent. We can introduce sanctions, visa sanctions, and we can stop giving them money. We can prove why we have the strength to do this. Thank you.
Colleagues, in international law, we have two competing values fully implemented in our law. Protection of external borders is a precondition for the country's security. We need to overhaul our policy for the protection of external borders. Without protected external borders, including physical walls, we will not ensure an efficient Schengen system. The migration policy of the left with regard to illegal migration has opened the door of this House to the radical right. Illegal instrumentalized migration placed to the hands of the dictators against democracies. We need to stop that.
Very much. The next speaker is Harald Wilimski.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. The idea that we are talking about migration here, and one perhaps absurd example is in my country, where a Syrian family receives more than 4,000 euros of public money every single month. And in addition to that, there's a climate bonus. In the last month was more than 400 euros. And there's also additional assistance. So this Syrian family has received 5,500 euros of public money, and this is double what citizens of Austria in my hometown earn. So those people are paying taxes for the public good, contributing. On the other hand, you have people that are being funded who are here in Austria being protected, so to speak. But the only solution is to help these people in their own countries, on their own continent, so they do not come to Europe anymore. Thank you.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, President. Yes, we do want to put the returns directive back on the table. And because we've asked for this debate, the left is complaining, and I heard Valérie Ayer from Renew immediately refer to populism. But where are you living, everybody? The following decisions taken last year in Europe, only 20% of people were actually returned. And in France, the figure was even lower than that. Why? Well, because of our law. It's a law against law, as it were. Very often, the law ends up being against some of our basic principles. The law governing asylum is flouted every day by our smugglers. And we need to get away from this, out of this impasse. And if we don't, the citizens in our countries will criticize and complain. The time has come to decide who is going to enter our country rather than let the criminals decide for us.
From Madame Sorel, do you accept it?
Bien sûr.
Of course.
Si votre collègue Madame Dupont.
Now, your colleague, Madame Dupont from the EPP, has just said a few minutes ago that the EPP was in favour of just sharing illegal migrants over the member states of the EU. She even referred to the principle of solidarity. Would you confirm that, Mr. Bellamy? Of course, that is totally wrong, and those who will be able to listen to what Madame Dupont said, and those who will listen to what we do in the EPP will realize this. We are saying that we want to put an end to illegal migration. We don't want to share them between us. We want them to return to their countries. And that is the work we'll be doing on the Returns Directive with all the colleagues here. We have tabled this subject, and we are proud to ensure that Europe will build an effective strategy. That is perhaps a difference between us. We want to fight illegal migration so that our states will be sovereign in terms of their migratory policy.
Speaker is Paolo Cunha.
Senhora Presidente, senhores deputados,
Madam Chair, ladies and gentlemen, honourable members. Well, migration crisis is an issue of our times, and we need to deal with it in a dignified manner. In Portugal, in the coalition government, we have set up a whole series of measures, efficient measures to welcome those who want to come to our country, but also to manage the situation and to fight abuse. We try to take on immigrants who want to regularize their situation. We want to avoid illegal immigration. We want each immigrant who comes to our country is dealt with respectfully and has dignified conditions. We need to find innovative solutions which respects these issues. Apart from legal measures taken by the Prime Minister, we've also set up centres in Portugal. We wanted to have an integrated approach, and we don't want to build walls around our external borders. We need to invest in advanced technology and also to defend the external borders of the European Union. That is key for a Schengen country. It is only through that that we can achieve this. Thank you. You have run out of time, sir.
Please stop. The time is over.
Zanim zaczną działać
Thank you. Before the Pact starts working, we need to stop the influx of migrants who are part of hybrid aggression. Procedures so far have meant that the EU has been helpless, and this is a weapon used by Moscow and Minsk. We don't have information about those who are crossing the borders illegally and claiming asylum. We have the right to know who is arriving in our countries, and if we do not have that information, we need to have the right to deny them entry into the EU. According to Russian doctrine, there is no distinction between the different tools of warfare. Their diplomacy, acts of diversion, or instrumentalization of migrants are all ways of waging war, as it is with weapons, missiles and tanks. I hope that this House will understand this, especially those on the left. Thank you. Thank you very much, Madam President. Colleagues, it's very good to hear that we're starting to return to a common sense approach in the European Parliament, because 5 years ago we saw proposals about stopping illegal migration which were simply not good enough. They were too extreme. We need to remove some of the taboos. The attacks on illegal migration are there. We're seeing an increase in social policy, social security payments. This is all leading to confusion. We need to continue on the route that we have embarked on. We need to be very, very strict with the return directive. We need to have a proposal which contains very strict rules, and perhaps we'll need complementary legislation as well. And I think that we have a majority in this Parliament which is determined, which is courageous, and is able to meet the expectations and demands of the citizens. Thank you.
To catch the eye, the first speaker is Paulius Saudargas. 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Dear colleagues, the Europe is full. In parallel with strategic and cautious integration policy, which is a long-term solution, the only answer is fostering the returns. We should be especially alert in the context of instrumentalized migration. During the Lukashenko's hybrid attack on Lithuania, Latvia and Poland, around 150,000 illegal crossings were registered in a short time slot. And these crossings were accompanied by the special forces of Belarus, which in some cases forced the migrants to enter the European Union using their brutal armed force. Any kind of further escalation is possible in such a context. Our countries faced a need for an urgent solution. We Lithuanians built the physical barrier on our own account in a record time. But what we really lacked was a common European-wide approach to returns. The negotiations with the third countries on readmitting their nationals, for example Iraq, were complicated. Only together as an EU we can do it. To demolish Schengen and to build walls between ourselves is not an European solution. To strengthen the external borders and to foster the return process, this is the answer.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Juan Fernando López Aguilar.
Frau Präsidentin. Un fantasma
Thank you, Madam. Well, there's a ghost hovering over Europe, a ghost of rejecting immigration. And when we should work together, we worked for a pact. We worked arduously, and now this needs to be implemented incompatible with the externalization of borders and with the subcontracting of asylum requests. I mean, the von der Leyen letter, which is basically a kind of Meloni copy of Mrs. Meloni's initiatives, I mean, that runs counter to the interests of the European Union. And those obsessed with returns, let me tell you that the priority is inclusion. The priority is to fight mafias and trafficking. And you need to find legal, safe ways. So honestly, Commission, it is time to call upon Member States to meet their obligations with the Pact, shared responsibility and solidarity. Thank you.
The next speaker is Susanna Ceccardi.
Thank you, President. 1 million of returns which did not take place, people who deserve to be deported. This is what we're talking about. But what did the European Union do to avoid this and to help our security? Nothing. The EU doesn't do anything. In fact, they do the exact opposite. It puts the spoke on the wheels in any measure taken by a member state to stop irregular migration. We have an agreement with Albania to build centres there for deportation, but the Italian judges are blocking this simply for political reasons. The judges have tried Matteo Salvini because he stopped illegal migration back in 2019. He's being accused of having trapped people. This is really incredible. Incredible. This is the way they respond to somebody who's trying to do something about the situation. If you think that a person who doesn't want to integrate with European culture, who doesn't respect the principles of equality between men and women, should we keep all these people? Now, really, let's meet the requirements of European citizens. They want security and less migration.
Christian Tinkinen.
Arvoisa puhemies, ilolla katson, miten Euroopan suunta maahanmuuttopolitiikassa.
Thank you. Look at the direction of the European Union's migration policy. We need to follow Finland's example and what Germany has done by re-establishing border checks on internal borders. And 17 member states have called for a strengthening of returns and the returns directive. But there's a lot of work to do. The number of people who are subject to a returns decision is a threat to Europe. It's a question of time before things get worse. We have had migration policy which was not firm enough and which has led to uncontrolled migration and economic migration. And we can see all of these people from Middle East to Germany to Sweden and then Finland.
Thank you. Honourable Member, well, correct approach in the area of immigration is crucially important. We need a fair immigration policy. We need to decide who can enter Europe and not the mafias. And we know what we need to do. We need to strengthen our external borders. I mean, it's just what you need to do is put this immigration pact into practice and also use a return policy humanely. And then we won't have any difficulties, and we wouldn't have to have any internal border controls. I mean, we are so attached to being able to freely move of persons and goods. But I mean, this is really an obstacle to our economy, and we then wouldn't really need any of those ideas of surrogate prisons. And to the right, really, let me tell you one thing. Don't forget, colleagues, don't forget that you have the good fortune of having been born in a country living in peace. Thank you.
The next speaker is João Oliveira.
Obrigado, Presidente.
Thank you, Madam President. Now, safe channels for migration, investment in social policy, respect for social rights, universal rights, workers' rights, rejection of discrimination, to fight against the exploitation of migration by those of certain financial interests. We have a migratory pact up to 2025. We have also the decisions which were taken by the European Council. It would appear that our migratory policy is very selective indeed, so much so that people who try to escape war, death, hunger are people who find themselves still at risk when they reach here. So I think that we need a different policy, a more inclusive one, which respects human rights and includes all individuals regardless of their origin. That's what we need.
Mr. Sieper.
Liebe Menschen Europas,
dear people of Europe, we will manage it. This is one sentence which has traumatized some people here than people who are crossing the Mediterranean on boats or dinghies. Experts say that climate change will lead to hundreds of millions of people coming to Europe, and these people will come. One colleague said, we are talking about a reform. No, a reform has actually been adopted. It was adopted earlier this year, the new Asylum and Migration Pact. Now, of course, nobody is helped by illegal migration and it causes problems. Now, of course, there are challenges with legal migration, but migration is our opportunity to tackle issues, a shortage of workers, the pension system that's collapsing, and people who are fleeing rural areas. The solution is not easy, but we will manage it. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Tonin.
Dear colleagues, if we want to make sure that irregular migration is somehow manageable, it is clear that we need to change our message. Anyone who enters the European Union illegally will be returned to their own country of origin. That is the only way to stop this flow that has been unstoppable so far. We need to ensure we have mechanisms that enable us to effectively return everyone who enters the EU illegally. If we do not have this at our disposal, irregular migration will not be managed, because people will always find a way to come here since they are searching for better lives, and they come here while we are saying, well, we'll make do. The latest letter of the President of the European Commission shows that finally the European Union is taking the right direction to manage irregular migration. Thank you.
Andriukaitis.
Thank you, President. Here, the MEPs sitting on the right were showing their finger towards the left. I have to admit, I was born in Stalin's Gulag, and I spent a lot of years in deportation. So those who say that the European Union needs fences, walls and barbed wires, I would like to say the European Union is based on human values, international law and the rule of law and democracy. This is the fortress of democracy and the rule of law. We don't see representatives of the Council, and that's a pity, because heads of state and government do not implement the Migration and Asylum Pact. Implementation of the Pact is a solidarity and responsibility of all member states, and this needs to be implemented. We have to say once again, we need to protect human rights.
Thank you. I will give the floor now to Commissioner Dalli for 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, President. Dear honourable members, migration has always existed, albeit it's a changing phenomenon, driven by new opportunities for movement, but also by a changing geopolitical context. With the Pact, we took several steps in the right direction, and making it work is a top priority. We must be ready to adapt our management of migration to new realities. Cooperation with third countries is an important element of our comprehensive approach. We need to further strengthen this aspect if we are to prevent irregular migration and fight smugglers successfully. The Return Directive was adopted 16 years ago. During those 16 years, our migration situation has obviously changed. Our practices and operational reality have evolved considerably. Some member states are calling for exploring possible ways forward as regards solutions, like the idea of developing return hubs outside the EU. The Commission will continue to explore possible ways forward as regards the idea of developing return hubs outside the EU, especially in view of a new legislative proposal on return. But let me stress, important attention will be paid to the respect of fundamental rights when considering measures such as return hubs. Exchanges with international organizations such as UNHCR are taking place to make sure international law and the principle of non-refoulement is always respected in all cases. The Commission will build on the achievements of recent years to ensure that we stand fair and firm on migration, addressing with European solutions what we all agree to be a European challenge. This is what the European citizens expect, and we will deliver. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The debate is now closed. The next item on the agenda is Commission statement, Tackling the Steel Crisis, Boosting Competitive and Sustainable European Steel and Maintaining Quality Job. Commissioner Dalli, if you're ready to take the floor again. Yeah. Sorry, we make you work very hard. You have 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, President, honourable members.